This is an introductory talk about Eve, which is a REST API framework which was released about 1 year ago. This is being told by a guy who really enjoyed the Delirium Cafe yesterday, so sorry for my voice. And the first thing I'm going to do is explain what the concept is all about. You basically have a data somewhere, and you need a REST API to expose your data to any kind of client. In our use case, for example, we needed to synchronize our desktop applications with our mobile apps on iOS and Android, and so we needed a web service that could work as an API for us. The end product is called Eve and is hopefully as simple as installing it and setting up a few settings. I will show you in a minute. It is powered by Flask, which is a very well-known micro web framework. Probably a lot of you. How many of you are using Flask or have been using Flask in production or experimenting with it? Okay, great. It is also powered by MongoDB as a backend data store. We'll see that you can eventually add your own data layers later, and Redis for some features which are very intensive, like rate limiting and so forth. Okay, how do you get your REST API up and running? You simply build a settings PI file. I don't know if you can see anything here, but in any case, you just define a schema for your API endpoint. In this case, we are making a people endpoint, so we have a first name, a role field, location, and born. You can specify your data types and validation rules, so it is very easy to do. And then you add some few rules. For example, here we are telling that our API should support get and post methods on the endpoint, while the item endpoint, so for example, if you have /people/ID, that is the item endpoint of the single people, the single person, you allow get, patch, and put on the ID endpoint. Some basic stuff like giving your MongoDB database data, and this is all you need to build your API tree. Basically, you just set a domain dictionary with your people endpoint, which you have defined earlier, and then you build your launch script, which is very simple. Actually, you just have to import Eve and run the application that you are, and it will just be running. Sorry. You just have to launch your API, and your API is running on the local host, or of course, if you didn't change the server settings. So what do you get from this? The basic idea behind Eve is that you get almost all the functionality out of the box without too much coding. So the features I'm going to show here are already available on such an API, such a simple API as the one I showed you before. First, simple things like filters. Your API will support both Mongo syntaxes for the filters, something like this. If your client, or even with a browser, you can hit your people endpoint with a query like this, and of course you are asking for last name equals do. For any of you is familiar with the MongoDB syntaxes? Great. You can also use the Python syntax. We are using undercovers, we are using abstract syntax trees to translate one query format from to another. And then you have support for sorting, so your your collections, your endpoints can be, your clients can ask for different kind of sortings, ascending, descending, and so forth. We support pagination, so you can ask for page 3 or set the number of max results, so how many documents do I want to receive from my API with this request, and at which page I want to access. We will see then that in the payload we also get the number of pages, all the data, the metadata that we need to be able to do this kind of requests. We support projection, which is a very nice option. Most of the time, when you are working on mobile devices, or in any case, when you are working on the internet, you don't want the full document to travel on the HTTP. You can, in this case, I'm telling, okay, give me the peoples, or from the people endpoint, and just the last name field, because this is what I need from the whole document. So if you have huge documents, you can just get the fields that you really need on your application or website or whatever. Another very nice option that we added a few weeks ago is embedded resources, which means something like this. If you send a request to the API, you normally get, if you have an author field, in this case, this is the ID field in the authors collection of the author, and this will be the standard reply. But if you send a request with, please embed the author, your payload will get back with something different. You get the full author from the author collection of the database embedded in your document. This is very nice because it allows, most of the time, it allows the client to solve his, to get all of the data he needs with a single request. Eve supports both JSON and XML out of the box, so you can make the same request on your API and get JSON, like in this case. Here you see a full list of, kind of a full list of people, so you see it's just an array of documents. And you can see there is some metadata there, updated, created, ID. We talk about those later. The same request, if you send application XML in the body header of your request, you get XML instead of JSON. You can, of course, disable support for XMLF if you don't want it to be supported by your API, or you can disable JSON if you... Most of the things that you are seeing here can be switched on and off however you wish, so you can configure your API exactly in the way you want it to work for you. There is also support for hypermedia as the engine of application state. This is something a very nice concept which is defined in the REST principles. Basically, with every response payload that your API is sending back to the clients, you also get a links section, dictionary, and these are, as you can see, the navigational options that your client has from this endpoint. For example, if you requested the people endpoint, here you get the next page is at this URL, and the title is next page. Why this? Because in REST principles, in theory, you could build a client which is updating its UE using this metadata. And to tell you the truth, almost nobody is using this option, but in theory it is very cool because your client could adapt his interface depending on the input sent by the API, and so it could change dynamically day after day eventually. Or discover the API tree without the need of hard coding the API tree in the client. Another very nice option that was added recently is file storage. So you can send documents which have fields, so strings, integers, list, arrays, but you can also send a file, so an image, a PDF within your document. This is very simple to do because when you define your endpoint, like the one we saw before, we were looking at people earlier. Now we are looking at accounts. For example, we define a name of type string field, and then we declare a pick field of type media. Then, when this is done, when a client sends, for example, a post request to the API, he just sends the JPG. Here we are using curl, but you can play with an Eve API or with whatever client you want. For example, there is an excellent REST client as a Chrome extension, which is called Postman. You can play with it, and it is very easy to to test the API. So here we are sending a document which includes both the name John and the profile picture in emg.jpg. When you get back that document, what you actually get is a base 64 encoding of the picture. So you just have to decode it and you have the picture ready to for display on your client. Now think about it, since we also support projections, as we saw earlier, you can exclude images for in the response payload if you don't want them because they are maybe too heavy and you don't want your client to download them all the time. And also you can define what the standard API response is when it comes to projections. So you can make it so that your endpoint will not send the images back unless the client asks for them in the projection with the projection option. Another feature that your API is going to have is rate limiting, which is basically limiting the number of accesses that a single client can do on the same endpoint. This is done to avoid denial service attacks, but also a buggy client which is constantly sending a request to your API and making it fail. It works like this. You just here we are just telling, hey, we are not going to allow more than 3 requests in a 1-minute window per client. You can, of course, change the rate limits for each method, so you can have post more limited than gets. You can also have some endpoints which have rate limiting and others API endpoints with no limitation at all. When you hit the endpoint with a request here, in your response header, you also get the information. So, okay, you had one request, you have 0 left, the next request will get a response like this, too many requests. This was a very simple example. It doesn't really make sense to limit your API endpoint to just 1 or 2 requests, but it was just for showing purposes. Conditional request. This is very simple. Most of the time you don't want your whole payload sent back to the client. The client can say, hey, send me only most recent data. For example, only if it is modified since this date, and the client will send you only in the case of the people endpoint, the client will only send you the new documents or the modified documents since that date. The same happens with the if non-match header, which is another common header used by REST APIs. This is very nice if you, for example, want to ask for a single document, let's say an invoice. You already have the invoice on your client. You got an e tag about of the invoice, which is basically an hash of the invoice. With every response from the API, you get objects, e-tags for every object. So when you ask for the document again, you can say, okay, send me the document only if it has changed, because this is the e-tag of the document I have on my client. Has it changed on the API? If yes, send it back to me. Otherwise, the API will respond with a 3 or 4 not modified. And so we are limiting the traffic on the HTTP channel. Another very nice option are bulk inserts. This is kind of creating some discussion on Stack Overflow. I just saw an email by somebody complaining about this option, or the way we implemented it. Anyway, bulk inserts is very simple. You can send multiple documents for insertion at once. So in a single request, if you have 10 invoices, you can send all of them in a list in a single post, and the database the API will save on the database in a single loop. So it is very optimized to reduce again traffic and performance and improve performance. You are sending these 2 documents in this example. you get a response that, of course, is taking care of the two documents. What you have here is a validation status for the two documents. What I want to tell you is basically that you get e-tags. This is the second document. This is the first document. You also get, remember, a hypermedia state of the engine. You get the link at the. This is bugged, but because I wrote it down. But you get the link to the single document endpoint. You get the item ID last updated, which allows you to send if modified scenes request in the future. And what is very important, the status, because when you send multiple documents to the API, every single document is checked against validation. Some may fail and other will success. So you get for every document if it was accepted or not. If there is an error, we will see later, you will get what the error was for that document. Data integrity concurrency control, this is done to prevent clients with the older version of the documents to overwrite the most recent version which is stored on the server. So, for example, if you send a patch command, which means modify, edit the document. If you send a patch, you always are going to get back a forbidden, not allowed response from the server. Why this? Because you need to provide your document e-tag. So you have to prove, the client have to prove that you have the latest version of the document. If you do, in this case, if we don't, because we are giving the if match tag, but the e-tag does not match the e-tag computed on the server, on the document version on the server, and so you are getting a precondition fail, which means basically the request is formally correct, but your document is older than the one we have on the server. So I'm not going to overwrite the copy on the server with an addition of your old obsolete document. Okay. Here we are giving the right heat tag and we get our edit accepted. Data validation, I told you earlier, here the first document got an error, so it didn't get accepted for it, it wasn't inserted, and you get the reason for the error. There is support for a number of authentication schemes. Basic token HMAC, which is basically the method used by Amazon AWS, AWS. If you had to deal with it, you know about HMAC already. It is very secure. Runs on all versions or recent versions of Python. There are a lot of more features. We are not going to cover them. You can give a look at the repo. It's BSD licensed, so you can use it any way you want, tear it apart. We have a lot of people who are actually using our source code just to implement their own API. Feel free to do as you wish with the code. Okay, what we have seen so far is all you get out of the box without basically doing any kind of coding. But you can do something and play with Eve. For example, you can make custom data layers, which means that besides MongoDB, you might want to support, for example, SQL Alchemy. This is a branch that is available on the GitHub repo. The problem is that it has been installed for a few months. If any of you, I know there are some SQL magician here. I'm looking for somebody who wants to take up this branch, contribute and develop it any further. A few days ago, a guy released the Eve Elastic, which is a data layer for Elasticsearch, and the MongoDB is the default. Basically, you can build your own data layer upon Eve if you want. I'm going faster. Authentication, we have a number of options. Global, you can set a username and password for all the API, for all the endpoints, or you can set different levers of authentication at any endpoint, and the user-restricted access, role-based access control. There are many features. Very simple tutorial. You just want to implement your custom validation logic. You just import the basic auth class. Sorry. I think I skipped one. You override the check auth method. In this case, we are setting our request with that password and username. Not very safe. And then you run if with your custom class as the auth method. That's all you need to do to protect your API with your own custom logic. That's all you need to do. Same thing with custom validation. You can extend on the data validation system. You can build new data types. For example, if you need new data types, you can extend the validation logic. You also get a number of event hooks, so you can get a callback called when somebody is inserting a document. You can modify the document on the fly. You can add a custom logic. You can update other databases, other API, and so on. There are a number of callbacks which are coming in handy, will be very handy. Here there is an example of how you can transform a document, which is all the documents who are incoming are getting a new field called FOSDEM with the value is cool. It is very simple. You just add your hook, and then your function gets the payload, and you can modify the document. That's all you need to do. Custom file storage. We are storing in gridfs right now the images and the files because we are supporting MongoDB, but you can make your own classes and, for example, save on disk on a folder or on S3, etc. The community. We are looking for contributors. At the moment, we have about 30 contributors, but more are always welcome. There is a lot of stuff to do on the documentation, on the test suite, so please visit the repo if you are interested and get along with us. There are a number of extensions already. This is a very nice extension, ifdocs, which allows you to have a docs endpoint in your API, which is a static HTML page with the API documentation. This is done automatically by ifdocs for you. ifmocker for mocking tool for Eve. Mongo Engine, if any of you is using Mongo Engine or ARM, this will map your Mongo Engine classes to Eve settings. And Eve Elastic, I told you earlier. We are working on a number of new features like document history, which is very cool, and it is about ready to be released. Support for other formats. And that's it. This is the project homepage. Please go give a look and have fun with it. Thank you. Questions?
Is it possible to maybe modify data that is being sent out to the client? So let's say in case of image, if you want to pass instead a URL to the image?
So the question was, can I change the data that is going to be sent to the client? Yes, you can, because you can, as we saw before, you can plug a callback function to your request, and so that your callback function will be called when when the data is about to be sent. Actually, we have an onFetch event hook, which is being called when the data is coming from the database, from the server, from the database to the API, and then we have an I don't remember, on get, no, or on, I don't remember, on get maybe, which is another hook which is fired after the data has been sent to the client. So you have several options, and you can completely transform your document in these hooks because you have total control on the payload. In this case, since you asked about the images, you can even pick another route and simply build your own file storage class, which will transform the data as it comes from the database without having to work on the callback level. You have both options at your hand. Other questions?
Yeah, so very interesting project.
Thanks.
Just wanted to ask about the conversion between JSON and XML. if so, how do you handle things like lists where typically in XML you want to have like, I don't know, if you have a person that has like, I don't know, roles. You have like attribute like roles in the plural sense, and you have like role in the singular sense below that. But in JSON you want to have like a list with without a structure. How do you handle that?
First question, yes, we are basically using JSON internally for all, also because Python is Mongo is working with dictionaries and lists, and Python has dictionaries, so internally Eve is using JSON. It's at the rendering level. When we are sending back the data, we are going to transform it to XML if this is if XML is actually supported by your API and you didn't turn it off. This said, we don't actually I think we don't support XML attributes. You have to see the XML rendered by yourself actually. But I think when we have an array, we are making role, every single role available within the document as a embedded document within the XML. I don't remember actually, but I think it is surely supported anyway. I hate XML actually, but I just had to deal with it. And actually, a lot of people are using XML, which was very surprising. I'm getting a lot of emails by people using XML, so it was a good idea.
Do you support geographical queries?
Okay, the question is, does Eve support the geographical queries? Not directly. But what we are doing here is sending the query of the request query directly on to the data layer, which means that we could, or you could, easily expand the data layer to support these kind of queries. Actually, this is an interesting question, because one choice I made when I was designing this feature set was to not parse the query at an intermediate level, and but the parsing of the query is done by the data layer actually, and this is precisely because every data store has different feature sets. For example, Mongo is very strong in processing geospatial data. But for example, if you want to implement SQL alchemy, which would be very cool, again, hey, if you are SQL developers, come join me. And if you are to support SQL alchemy, for example, you might not like that query format where you are using brackets and JSON syntax. Basically, you might want to support something more similar to SQL syntax. You might do that with ease because you can do that at the data layer interface. So you are going to have probably many Eve instances on different APIs, and each one might have a different query language, depending on the data store and the implementation below that instance of Eve. Other questions? Thank you.